So Job, we're going to do Job 29, 30, and 31.
All righty.
Okay, so we had the prologue, the introduction to the story. We had the three cycles, which is the conversation of Job and his three friends. Um, we've gone through all that. The cycles are ended. The conversation with the friends is ended. Then last time we had the wisdom poem, and now we're entering into this new section of the book, which I just call it the three speeches, because Job speaks for 3 chapters. This new guy, Elihu, speaks for, I don't know, 6 or 7 chapters. He speaks forever.
Yeah.
And then God finally speaks for 4 chapters. So
The star of the show finally gets his
the
moment.
star, he appears.
The one we've been waiting for. Oh, yeah. I mean, if you think about it, it's written as a novel. It's kind of like it is the moment you're waiting for because Job's just constantly saying, I want to talk to you. I want to talk to you. I
Yeah.
demand to talk to you, you know?
And he's really like, these 3 chapters are kind of a summary of what Job Job just summarizes everything in these
I
three
know.
chapters. So
I was listening to it. I was listening to it up at my chicken coop. My ear. I turned around because I'm like focused on the thing and I'm scooping up the scratch and I turn around and all the chickens are like they're waiting. I'm like, are you guys waiting? They do.
so funny. All right. And Job again took up his discourse and said, "Oh, that I were in the months of old, as in the days when God watched over me, when his lamp shone upon my head, and by his light I walked through darkness. As I was in my prime, when the friendship of God was upon my tent, when the Almighty was yet with me, when my children were all around me, when my steps were washed with butter, and the rocks poured out me streams of oil. When I went out to the gate of the city, when I prepared my seat in the square, the young men saw me and withdrew, and the aged rose and stood. The princes refrained from talking and laid their hand upon their mouth. The voice of the nobles was hushed, and their tongue stuck to the roof of their mouth. When the ear heard it, it called me blessed, and when the eye saw, it approved, because I delivered the poor who cried for help, and the fatherless who had none to help him. The blessing of him who was about to perish came upon me, and I caused the widow's heart to sing for joy. I put on righteousness, and it clothed me. My justice was like a robe and a turban. I was eyes to the blind and feet to the lame. I was father to the needy, and I searched out the cause of him whom I did not know. I broke the fangs of the unrighteous and made him drop his prey from his teeth. Then I thought, I shall die in my nest, and I shall multiply my days as the sand. My roots spread out to the waters, and dew all night on my branches. My glory fresh with me, and my bow ever new in my hand. Men listened to me and waited, and kept silence from my counsel. After I spoke, they did not speak again, and my word dropped upon them. They waited for me as for the rain, and they opened their mouths as for the spring rain. I smiled on them when they had no confidence, and the light of my face they did not cast down. I chose their way and sat as chief, and I lived like a king among his troops, like one who comforts mourners.
Mm.
Chapter 30. But now they laugh at me, men who are younger than I, whose fathers I would have disdained to set with the dogs of my flock. What could I gain from the strength of their hands, men whose vigor is gone? Though I want and hard, though, sorry, through want and hard hunger, they gnaw the dry ground by night in waste and desolation. They pick saltwort and the leaves of bushes and the roots of the broom tree for their food. They are driven out from human company. They shout after them as after a thief. In the gullies of the torrents they must dwell, in holes of the earth and of the rocks. Among the bushes they bray, under the nettles they huddle together. A senseless, nameless brood, they have been whipped out of the land. And now I have become their song. I am a byword to them. They abhor me. They keep aloof from me. They do not hesitate to spit at the sight of me. Because God has loosened my cord and humbled me, they have cast off restraint in my presence. On my right hand, the rabble rise and they push away my feet. They cast up against me their ways of destruction. They break up my path. They promote my calamity. They need no one to help them. As through a wide breach they come. Amid the crash, they roll on. Terrors are turned upon me. My honor is pursued as by the wind, and my prosperity has passed away like a cloud. And now my soul is poured out within me. Days of affliction have taken hold of me. The night racks my bones, and the pain that gnaws me takes no rest. With great force my garment is disfigured. It binds me like the collar of my tunic. God has cast me into the mire, and I have become like dust and ashes. I cry to you for help, and you do not answer me. I stand, and you only look at me. You have turned cruel to me. With the might of your hand, you persecute me. You lift me up on the wind to make me ride on it, and you toss me about in the roar of the storm. For I know that you will bring me to death and to the house appointed for all the living. Yet does not one in a heap of ruins stretch out his hand and in his disaster cry for help? Did not I weep for him whose day was hard? Was not my soul grieved for the needy? But when I hoped for good, evil came, and when I waited for light, darkness came. My inward parts are in turmoil and never still. Days of affliction come to meet me. I go about darkened, but not by the sun. I stand up in the assembly and cry for help. I am a brother of jackals and a companion of ostriches. My skin turns black and falls from me, and my bones burn with heat. My lyre is turned into mourning, and my pipe to the voice of those who weep. Chapter 31. I have made a covenant with my eyes. How then could I gaze at a virgin? What would be my portion from God above and my heritage from the Almighty on high? Is not calamity for the unrighteous and the disaster for the workers of iniquity? Does he not see my ways and number all my steps? If I have walked with falsehood and my foot has hastened to deceit, let me be weighed in a just balance and let God know my integrity. If my step has turned aside from the way and my heart has gone after my eyes, and if any spot has stuck to my hands, then let me sow and another eat, and let what grows for me be rooted out. If my heart has been enticed towards a woman, and I have lain in wait at my neighbor's door, then let my wife grind for another, and let others bow down on her. For that would be a heinous crime. That would be an iniquity to be punished by the judges. For that would be a fire that consumes as far as Abaddon, and it would burn to the root all my increase. If I have rejected the cause of my manservant or my maidservant when they brought a complaint against me, what then shall I do when God rises up? When he makes inquiry, what shall I answer him? Did not he who made me in the womb make him? And did not one fashion us in the same did not one fashion us in the womb? If I have withheld anything that the poor desired, or have caused the eyes of the widow to fail, or have eaten my morsel alone, and the fatherless had not eaten of it, or from my youth the fatherless grew up with me as with a father, and from my mother's womb I guided the widow. If I had seen anyone perish for lack of clothing, or needy without covering, if his body has not blessed me, and if he was not warmed with the fleece of my sheep, if I have raised my hand against the fatherless because I saw my help in the gate, then let my shoulder blade fall from my shoulder, and let my arm be broken from its socket. For I was in terror of the calamity of God, and I could not have faced his majesty. If I have made gold my trust, or called fine gold my confidence, if I have rejoiced because my wealth was abundant, or because my hand had found much, if I have looked at the sun when it shone, or the moon moving in splendor, and my heart has been secretly enticed, and my mouth has kissed my hand, this also would be an iniquity to be punished by the judges, for I would have been false to God above. If I had rejoiced at the ruin of him who hated me, or exulted when the evil overtook him, I have not let my mouth sin by asking for his life with a curse. If the men of my tent have not said, who is there that has not been filled with his meat? The sojourner has not lodged in the street. I have opened my doors to the traveler. If I had concealed my transgressions as others do, by hiding my iniquity in my heart, because I stood in great fear of the multitude, and the contempt of families terrified me, so that I kept silence and I did not go out of doors. Oh, that I had one to hear me. Here is my signature. Let the Almighty answer me. Oh, that I had the indictment written by my adversary. Surely I would carry it on my shoulder. I would bind it on me as a crown. I would give him an account of all my steps. Like a prince, I would approach him. If my land has cried out against me, and its furrows had wept together, if I had eaten its yield without payment, and made its owners breathe their last, let thorns grow instead of wheat, and foul weeds instead of barley. The words of Job are ended. All right, so that's a lot.
Mm-hmm. It is.
So it's kind of broken up into three sections. The first section is chapter 29, and it's Job talking about his former glory. Then chapter 30 is Job's present humiliation. And then 31 is Job's negative confession. And it's called a negative confession because he's saying what he did not do.
Yeah.
So any overall thoughts?
I had more thoughts for chapter 31 than I did really for I mean, when you read chapter 29, it sounds like he was a good person, right? Like a good ruler. He says I dwelt as a king in the army, as one that comforts the mourners.
Yep.
So like he has this incredible empathy for people's suffering, and he talks about that, bringing joy to the widows and caring for the fatherless. And I was a father to the poor. I was eyes to the blind and feet to the lame. I put on righteousness, and it clothed me. Like he this is not a guy that used it for manipulative purposes. He actually, it became a part of him, right?
Right.
He took joy in it. Like it was his what do you call it? His destiny, in a way, to be this person to others. Like it's very other oriented, the whole speech. Right?
Yep. Yeah, he's not wishing for the good old days when things just be like, oh, I wish things were better back when I was at ease, when I had wealth, when I didn't have to worry, when I wasn't in pain. He doesn't say that in this.
When I could order other people to do all my bidding, and
right.
When I could have all the women I ever wanted, and like that's kind of like what Solomon does in Ecclesiastes, right? Like he's talking about all this vain stuff that he did. Job doesn't have any of that in here at all.
No, it's not vanity what Job's been doing, and it's sort of like just a detailed description of what we learned in chapter 1, that he's upright and blameless.
Yes.
And
do you think that he's looking for the place that he might have stumbled? in listing it all out. Like it doesn't feel like he's parading all his righteousness to others. Like it feels introspective, this
Yeah, it
chapter.
does, doesn't it? It
Yeah.
feels like he's searching himself as he's saying these
Yeah.
things.
Yeah, exactly.
Um, One thing that's interesting, so he talks about, um, well, let's just start at the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so he talks about, oh, that it were in the months of old when God watched over me, when his lamp shone on my head, when the friendship of God was on my tent, the Almighty was with me, and when my children were all around me. Like, even, and then he says, when my steps were washed with butter and the rock poured out streams of oil. What a what a description, that your steps are washed with butter.
Yeah, well, that's like that. The last time we were talking, I was saying it sounded like a description of old age. Remember? And
Mm-hmm,
this sounds like a description of youth, right? When your joints
mm-hmm.
are all oiled and you can just
Yeah,
you don't
yeah.
you don't think about, you're just going,
Yep.
right? Just you're all greased up and ready to go.
All green stuff and right.
Because I'm telling you, as you get older, you get a little stiffer,
Oh, I know. I know.
right?
I have a crick in my neck.
Yeah.
And but right out of the gate, he talks about his friendship with God, how God watched over him when his lamp was on his head. Like, this seems to be the most important thing that Job seems to have lost, which is sort of
Yeah.
the fellowship with God, when God was with him.
Yeah, he in the King James it says in verse 4, as I was in the days of my youth when the secret of God was upon my tabernacle.
Hmm.
Um, I'm curious why there's a difference. Because yours, I think you read friendship there,
Yeah,
right?
it says when the friendship of God was upon my tent,
Yeah, so
tabernacle tent.
why such a discrepancy between friendship and secret? Like there must be, what's the Hebrew word, do you know?
When I was in the days of my youth, when friendship of God rested on my tent, it literally says tent for the Hebrew. Um,
I think the King James always makes that tabernacle. But I'm just having the thought that secret in a lot of ancient cultures is sacred and sacred is secret. So that could be um, why it's called secret in the King James.
yeah, the Hebrew word for that is, so when friendship, which is, I don't know how to pronounce it, sod, it can mean in their council, the secret council,
Mm.
my inward, the friendship, the secret,
Mm-hmm. That's
the fellowship,
yeah.
the
It's
assembly,
yeah.
the fellowship of the ring.
Well, it's super personal and it's very sacred. Is the
Mhm. Right.
intonation sound of it, right? Like that's why I was curious what the Hebrew said there, because with friendship and secret, it
Mm-hmm.
sounds like a secret friendship. Like literally,
Yeah.
it seems to be like that's what it is. It's a sacred secret
Mm-hmm.
friendship. Yeah.
Well, and it's internal, so
Internal.
it's something that's not necessarily seen, and it's also rested on his tent. So that's like, there's the tent metaphor that he uses. Like he says, uh, the my tent cord has been plucked up within me. So
Yeah.
like when he talked about his fall, like, so the idea that you pick up the ropes are taut and they're holding the tent up, and so to pluck up that cord will make the tent collapse. And so but
Is that
he's
just the
referring
body?
to himself. So this idea that God rested on my tent is like, this is my body is my tent.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking. Like it's just the
Mm-hmm.
body, right? Like it's the image. I mean, you have that kind of language too in the New Testament when they talk about the body being the temple of the Holy Spirit. It's the same idea, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and I think it's one of these things that's also multivalent because it's also his household, is his
Right.
tent, and then
Yeah, yeah.
probably everything that his household and businesses and everything touches is his tent.
Yeah, well, that would be, you could think about that as just the how we're made for relationship. Like the first thing that came to my mind was those poor orphans that weren't given any physical contact in the orphanages and they
Mm-hmm.
failed, right?
Yep.
Because the body, the tabernacle, the tent actually needs to be connected to other bodies. So so this idea of the multivalent or the fractal,
Mm-hmm.
it always works
Yep.
because right, because everything is I don't know what I'm trying to say, but like connected in that way. So yeah.
Yep. Then he talks about, so I went out to the gate of the city when I prepared my seat in the square. So this is kind of an ancient
Mm-hmm.
thing where the men would meet at the gate or at the city square in order to talk about all the important things that need to be talked about to make sure the community, the city, the civilization is running well. Like that's who, and earlier he was talking about how he wished there was an arbiter. He wishes he could find God at the gate of the city so he could go talk to him and have this arbiter help work things out. So he's talking about going to the gate of the city where he prepared his seat in the square. And he talks about the young men kind of moving out of the way, the old men standing up to greet him. The princes stop talking. The nobles are hushed and they're all waiting for him to say something. And then when he said something, everyone was thankful, everyone was blessed. And um he and I, it he's not just saying, oh, I wish I was important again like that.
No.
I wish that I had that respectability. He's not saying that. He's actually saying, I wish people still listen to me
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I know,
because of
yeah.
what I'm saying.
Yeah,
Because the whole next chapter talks about how they scorn him.
right.
And it's not even these people that are scorning him. It's like the rabble, the outsiders that are scorning him. But
Yeah, because
he
he's fallen down into the down into that next level. Like he's just surrounded by the rabble, right?
mm-hmm.
Um, and there's no distinction there. Like that heap of rabble is just all like if you're in there, you're one of them, right?
You're like on Skid Row or something.
Yeah, like, and it's true. Like,
Yep.
when if you do walk down Skid Row and you see people laying around, you don't think of them as individuals. You think of them as a collective, right?
Yeah.
You do.
And if I ended up on Skid Row, they're not going to, like, I'm one of them. I'm not respectable. And especially if I was like someone who was respectable and then I've fallen
Yeah.
and then everyone's just making fun of me. Everyone's using me as an example of like what not to do, even though they're on Skid Row.
Yeah, you're just one of us. You're just a
Yep.
loser. You're just a loser like us. Yeah. Yeah.
Verse
No,
12.
oh, sorry. I just wanted to say I get that
Yeah.
same sense that he's not wishing that he had status again.
No.
Yeah, I don't get that either. I mean, I don't get that impression either.
Yeah. So he's saying, when the ear heard, it called me blessed. When the eye saw, it approved. And he says, because I delivered the poor who cried for help and the fatherless who had none to help him.
Mm-hmm.
So this is the reason why people listened to him and blessed him, because he delivered the poor that cried for help. It's not because it's clearly not because of status. It's because of what he was doing.
Yeah.
And this is the fulfillment of what's true religion is, taking care of the widows and orphans. So this is the poor and the fatherless in this case. Well, and then he talks about the next line. It says, "The blessing of him who was about to perish came from me, and I caused the widow's heart to sing for joy." And then he says, "I put on righteousness, and it clothed me. My justice was like a robe and turban." It's like what dignified me, what dressed me up and made me what I was my righteous acts.
Mm-hmm.
And he's not saying that in a, he's like, "Oh, I'm doing good. Look at me, I'm doing good." He's like, "No, the reason why people listen to me is because I was actually doing good."
Right, right. Yeah.
The eyes to the blind, feet to the lame, I was father to the needy. I searched out the cause of him whom I did not know. I broke the fangs of the unrighteous and made him drop his prey from his teeth. Then I thought, I shall die in my nest, and I shall multiply the days as sand. My roots spread out to the waters. When the dew all night on my branches, my glory fresh with me, and my bow ever new in my hand. So he's sort of saying, like, I thought this was just going to go. I was going to die eventually in old age,
Yeah.
full of just at peace, with everything that I've done surrounding me, his nest.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And then he says at the very end, again, talking about men listening to him, "Men listened to me and waited, kept silent for my counsel. I spoke and they did not speak again." And then it says, "They waited for me as for the rain, and they opened their mouth as for the spring rain."
Mm-hmm.
So he's like, people were thirsty for what I had to say, what I had to offer. He smiled on them when they had no confidence. And the light of my face they did not cast down. And then I chose their way and sat as chief. I lived like a king among his troops, like one who comforts mourners.
Mm-hmm.
What a lovely
Yeah.
just image.
Yeah. It's beautiful. I had to think about, and I don't know much about it, so I'm kind of name dropping by just talking about it. But I realized that I need to, like, when I was looking this over earlier,
Mm-hmm.
that I need to find more about what Heidegger thought about care, because he talks about that as being integral to being in the world, was this
Yeah.
idea of care. And that's what this whole chapter is about. It's about care. Job actually cared, right?
Yeah. You don't get a sense of a man who possesses things.
No, he's not doing, like this verse here where he says, I put on righteousness and it clothed me.
Mm-hmm.
My judgment was as a robe and a diadem. He doesn't flip that around. He doesn't say, you know, that for that he was doing these things so that,
Yeah.
right? It was as a result of doing those things, he was clothed with
Mm-hmm.
righteousness, right? But he wasn't trying to get the the
Right.
robe of righteousness and the crown and the turban and the, what is it,
The
the robe
turban
and
and the robe.
in the King James it says robe and diadem, so
Ooh, the diadem.
like a crown. I think
Yeah.
that's what the turban is. It's a crown,
Oh,
right?
right.
Yeah. So he's not aiming for those. He's not aiming for the status symbols. The status symbols are given to him because of the
Because,
way he is, you know. Yeah.
yeah, it's everything is so authentic and natural. Everything's flowing. Nothing is contrived.
No. No, nothing is.
So then we get into chapter 30, which is is a present humiliation. So this is sort of a lament. And so this is contrasted with the men at the gate, the men of the city in the square.
Yeah.
With now the men who are outside the city, who have been cast out away, and their response. So when in the city square and at the gate, men listened to him, they were silent, and now the men on the outside, they're making fun of him, they're singing songs, they're mocking him.
Yeah.
And they don't listen at all. Everything's a joke.
And they're also younger than him. I don't know if your version says that.
Yep. Men who are younger than I, whose fathers I would have disdained to set with the dogs of my flock.
Yeah.
Even my working dogs are better than their fathers.
And this, you have to remember that this comes from a culture where the elders are actually respected for their wisdom. So for the youth to mock the elder, it's really bad. Like right. that culture is going downhill when youth start to mock their elders, actually. I would say.
Right.
You're in a really like dystopian place, right, where that's happening.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah.
You get this metaphor again. Remember how Job talked about the men like wild donkeys?
Yeah.
You get that again where there's in verse 3 where it says, through want and hard hunger they gnaw the dry ground by night in waste and desolation. That'd be like the wild donkey in the desert, just gnawing on the dry ground, trying to get whatever little plant might be there.
Yeah.
They pick saltwort and leaves of bushes, the roots of the broom tree for their food. I think the King James, where was it say? Yeah, who pluck the mallow by the bushes and the broom tree for the roots of their food.
Yeah, the broom tree in here says juniper roots. I think it's just a tree that doesn't really have any. I hate junipers. We have them here everywhere.
Oh, really?
Well, they just, those flat growing, and they're really prickly. And then they have the blueberries on them. Juniper.
Uh-huh.
They just take up space. There are some birds that eat the berries, and I actually think that's what gin is made out of, juniper berries.
Oh, really?
Mm-hmm. I doubt they had juniper in the Middle East, but that would have been the equivalent in, the time that they translated.
Earlier, there was that part where Job said, when I cry, what was it? I think it was chapter 6 or something. He says something about the tasteless mallow.
Yeah.
But it appears that it's a different. I was looking to see if it was the same word, but it's actually a different word. So
I think it's just scrub. To me, as a farmer, it's descriptive of just scrubland, where you got these, mallows, which would be like some kind of weed that nothing really ever eats. And the animals are picking away at that, and the people even, because they have nothing, right? If they're outside of the gates, they're not cared for.
Yeah, it's kind of like it's a deserty type of situation.
Yeah, because in 5 it says they were driven forth from among men to dwell in the cliffs of the valleys and caves of the earth and in the rocks. Among the bushes they brayed, under the nettles they were gathered together.
Yeah, their brain. That's that donkey metaphor again.
Yeah, they were children of fools. Yea, children of base men, they were
Mm.
viler than the earth. And now I am their song. I am their byword. Like, it's the lowest of the low.
Here's the people that are the lowest of the low, and who are they making fun of? They're
Yeah.
making fun of me.
And they abhor him, he says in 10,
Yep.
right? They abhor me, they flee far from me, and spare not to spit in my face. Yeah. It
Yeah, and
reminds, you know what it reminds me of? It reminds me of that scene in um is it A Wonderful Life with Jimmy Stewart,
mm-hmm,
where he's never been born, right? He's in
mm-hmm.
that section of the movie where he's never been born, and he's in the bar, and the old pharmacist comes in who he worked for as a kid, but he's just a rummy, right? He's just a
Mm-hmm.
wino because he accidentally killed he wasn't there to stop him from giving that kid the pills that were actually poison
Right.
when he got drunk and because he found out his son died in the war. And yeah, that little story within the story of the pharmacist and then him being the rummy afterwards and everyone just laughing at him.
Mm.
It's such a beautiful picture of, to me, of how God sees us.
Mm.
Because I'm gonna elaborate on this a little bit, but you know, when he was a boy working for the pharmacist and he realized that the pills were poison and he tried to tell the guy hit him really badly in his ear, that his bad ear made it bleed and cry. And then the boy just persisted. No, you don't understand. And he knew that the man was in pain because he knew that his son had died, that he got the telegram. That's why he was drunk, right? And then the man realized what he had done, and
Mm-hmm.
embraced him and was sorry, and then never a word was said, right? The boy kept the secret, and the pharmacist, just fixed the problem. But then in the other scenario where he was never born, that didn't get to happen. And then the
Mm.
pharmacist was just like Job. He was just at the bottom of the heap, and everybody scorned him and laughed at him. But in the movie, when James Stewart looks at him, he sees the man who made a terrible mistake,
Mm.
right?
Right.
He sees that man, and he realizes just how badly things can go if there isn't someone there to forgive, to extend themselves beyond what's expected of them.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I hate to jump ahead, but that's exactly what God says when in God's speech he talks about the wild donkey.
Yeah.
And what God says about the wild donkey is in light of what Job has already said about these people being like wild donkeys. And God loves the wild donkey. He thinks the wild donkey's great. He sees things in the wild donkey that no one else sees.
Well, there's a tenacity there, like we talked about last
Mm-hmm.
week, right?
Yep.
They're in the wild donkey, like it actually survives on that scrubland, like on
Yeah.
that, you know with nothing to eat, and that is essentially us. Like we're out there, um because the world can be malevolent. We find
Mm-hmm.
ourselves in these desert places, and
Mm-hmm.
with nothing to eat, but we manage to survive. Like, it's just look at Skid Row.
Yep.
you know
Look at those
there it
people.
is.
Have you seen that series Soft White Underbelly where the
No,
guy
but
does
you
the
told me about.
yeah, the guy does interviews with a lot of people who are on Skid Row. Well, or a lot of his interviews are people on Skid Row. And it's incredible. He just asks them basic questions
Yeah.
and has them he's like, so where are you from? And then how'd you end up here? And just talk to these people and he he does such a good job of showing their just humanity, just in
Right.
all its pain and terribleness and glory, like all at once.
Yeah.
And it's
Yeah.
quite something.
And that is how God sees us. That's
Yep.
why he loves the wild donkey. I think that's kind of what I'm trying to get at,
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, so there, I when Job's comparing him to wild donkey, he also later on says, "I'm the brother of jackals and the companion of ostriches."
Mm-hmm.
Now, the jackals and ostriches are also desert dwelling. They're creatures of out in the wasteland,
Yeah.
and the verse right before that, he says, "I go about darkened, I stand up in the assembly and cry for help." And the jackals and ostriches both have a really kind of loud and um, unique cries
Yeah.
that so um, as Job's crying out, he's like, I'm a jackal now, I'm an ostrich, I'm one of these wild donkeys. Well, actually, the wild donkeys are the ones that make fun of me now.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay,
They
I've
do
become
sound donkeys and jackals. I mean, I've never really heard a jackal, but I imagine it's kind of similar to a coyote. Um,
yeah, it's like a wild
they've got
dog.
kind of a laughing, kind of mocking sound to their noises too. So that's interesting. I don't know about ostriches. I honestly have never heard one.
Yeah, I want to say more, but this is all in God's speech.
Oh, okay, yeah, we'll save it.
We'll have to save it, or else we'll just end up talking about God's speech.
And we're so dying to get to God's speech.
I know. Let's quickly get through this.
We got 7 chapters of
We're gonna just do one video on Elihu. I
okay.
mean, unless it, I don't know. I don't want to spend. Elihu is something else. I know people like him, so I do want to give it
Yeah,
its
yeah,
due. But
yeah.
okay, so 30 verse 11. Oh, because God has loosed my cord and humbled me. That's that tent metaphor. Like the cords have come loose, and um, my right hand, the rabble rise. They push away there's kind of like this. They push away my feet. They cast against me the way of destruction. They break up my path. They promote calamity. As through a wide breach they come. Amid the crash they roll on. It's almost like this horde, this rabble is almost like this chaotic mess.
Yeah.
That like this idea that as through a wide breach they come and they crash on, and this is terrors are turned upon me. My honor is pursued as by the wind. I'm just trying to make sense of like what is Job trying to say
Well,
by
let me read it in the King James. It's a
yeah
little bit different. Um, Upon my right hand rise the youth. They push away my feet, and they raise up against me the ways of their destruction. They mar my path. They set forward my calamity. They have no helper. They came upon me as a wide breaking in of waters. In the desolation, they rolled themselves upon me. Terrors are turned upon me. They pursue my soul as the wind, and my welfare passes away as a cloud. So to me, this feels like now it's become so. This is Barfieldian in the sense that he's looking at the jackals and the donkeys and the people outside of the city, right? And they represent all of this emotional, psychological torment. Like they're actually representations of that actual
yeah
torment. And now it feels like he's talking about the inner torment. right? The psychological torment that he's going through, like, because I don't think that the youth are rolling on top of Job and, marring his way, although
they're probably mocking him and spitting at him, like
all that. But this feels more like now he's making them representative of the things that are bothering him inside, coming
that's good.
after him, right?
I need to correct myself too, because when he says because he has loosed my cord, it means unstrung my bow. So it's a semblance of taking away strength. God has loosed my cord, unstrung my bow, and humbled me, so they have cast off restraint. So because God has made him weak, now they don't have any restraint.
Mm-hmm. No, he's just
yeah.
He's easy pickings, right?
Easy pickings. That's it. He's at the bottom of the pecking order.
Yeah.
Now my soul is poured out within me. Days of affliction have taken hold of me. The night racks my bones. The pain that gnaws at me takes no rest. With great force, my garment is disfigured. It binds about me like the collar of my tunic. So this is in reference to his skin disease and the scabs and the scarring and the.
Yeah. This is the King James says, by the great force of my disease is my garment changed. It binds me about as the collar of my coat. Yeah.
Yeah. And whenever you have like the skin disease, like you have it like, like when you move, your skin breaks and tears and all that stuff. And
it's not flexible. It's tight. Yeah.
All right. I cry to you for help. And I cry out to you. I'm trying to see if it's I cry out for help, but no answer. I was seeing if it was directly saying that this is you, meaning God, or
it says it says prayer answers to withheld. So, and then 21 seems to imply some kind of murmuring against God or something. That's just in my notes in the side of my Bible here.
Yeah, and the idea there is I think he's talking to God there and saying, I cry out to you for help, you don't answer. I stand and you only look at me. You have turned cruel to me. And the turned is like you've flipped. That's that thing he was talking about where he's like, you were this to me and now you've turned and you become the opposite to me. With the might of your hand, you persecute me. You lift me up on the wind. You make me ride on it. You toss me about in the roar of the storm. So it's definitely foreshadowing of how God shows up or where God speaks from. For I know that you will bring me to death into the house appointed for all living. Yet, yeah, this is interesting. He always gets to this point where he's like, death will be the resolution. Death will be the great equalizer. Death will bring a peace. So he says this line, for I know that you will bring me to death. And then 24, he says, yet I know that's going to be resolved, yet does not one in a heap of ruin stretch out his hand in a disaster and cry for help.
Yeah.
It's like, even though this will all work out in the end, doesn't someone get to cry out for help in a disaster?
Yeah. And this is the claim that George MacDonald talks about, right?
Yep.
That Job makes the claim on his creator. It's like, I could just resolve myself to say, okay, life is crappy and then I die, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or I could reach out. And that's why I think that making that claim is the greatest example of faith, in the sense that you actually believe that God can do more for you than you even know.
Right.
Right? Like what, like all Job, his wisdom tradition teaches him here is that he's being punished and he's going to die and it's going to be over.
Mm-hmm.
Right? There's no other options. But the reaching out is saying, no, there has to be another option, and that's faith.
Yep.
To me. Yeah.
Did I not weep for him whose day was hard? Was not my soul grieved for the needy? So he's like saying, like,
yeah,
when he's talking about the good old days. Back when everything was going for me, good for me. Didn't I weep for those whose day was hard? Was not my soul grieved? So he's like, if I had that happen, this is that hope. This is that hope that he has again. He's like, maybe God will have that towards me.
right.
And then,
well, this is, that this kind of gets to that, I know that my Redeemer lives.
Yep.
Yeah, because like I've been in some situations where I felt like, okay, there's nobody's here to help me, but I've helped others. I've been there for someone in their time of calamity, and maybe there's someone else like me out there who's going to come and help me, right, from my calamity. Like, because because you've done it yourself, that it's possible that someone else could do it for you, right? And that's hope. Like, that's not giving up hope, that's having hope.
Right. Yep.
Yeah.
Then he says, but when I hoped for good, evil came, and when I waited for light, darkness came. My inward parts are in turmoil and never still. And that's the turmoil. He has this hope, but then when he hopes for good, evil comes. When he waits for light, darkness comes. And so my inward parts are in turmoil and never still. This is that motion that's just going back, and that pressure that keeps coming upon him. I go about in darkness, not in the sun. I stand up in the assembly and cry for help. So this is in contrast to how he would come into the assembly to speak wisdom. Now he he comes into the assembly like just crying out and screaming.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because he says, I'm a brother of jackals, I'm a companion to ostriches. And in this case, no one's listening. No one's hearing him. My lyres turn to mourning, my pipe to the voice of him who weeps.
And my skin is black upon me, my bones are burned with heat. So it's like, he doesn't even look like someone you should respect. Right? Like, and this gets back to this whole idea of people being so caught up with what their eyes see, the organ of their eye, right? Like the actual anatomical eye, and of course that goes back to the whole mechanistic worldview, right? So it's like the machine sees and the machine deduces, right, that this is it, and I don't have to pay any attention to this person, because look with your eye, right? See what they look like. So it's all superficial. And then, going back to Job 28, God says wisdom is not on the surface.
It's in
right?
the depths.
It's in the depths. It's not what you can see. You can't see the path. You can't see, you can't see it as an animal on the ground, and you can't see it as a bird in the sky, because it isn't on the surface. It's in the depths. Yeah. So this is, I find it interesting that idea of just seeing with your eye as an instrument of, optics. Kind of, it's getting rehashed. What
Mm-hmm.
are we looking for? What is it that we see? How do we see wrongly? Right? Yeah.
Right. Seeing they do not see,
Yeah.
hearing they do not hear.
Yeah. Because it seems to me that the whole thing is just about the superficiality of their mechanistic worldview, right? That it doesn't, there's no room for, it just separates things into the dualities, right? You have the
Mm-hmm.
righteous and you have the wicked. You have the poor and you have the rich.
Mm-hmm.
There's nothing else there. There's no other reason for it. And like you were saying with the guy doing the soft white underbelly stuff, he's actually showing what Job talks about previously when he starts to empathize with the poor,
Mm-hmm.
the tenacity, the dignity, of these human beings, even though they're in a place where they look. And so it just goes to show you that we haven't changed a bit, right?
I know.
We haven't,
No,
not a bit,
no,
not one little bit.
no.
We still fall over that. We still
Yep.
stumble over that.
Yep.
Yeah.
Um, I had some really great idea, but I think you said it all.
Oh, okay. Mind reading.
Job 31. Um, so now we get into the negative confession and sort of and then at the very end we have his final statements. So,
I have to ask you, what do you think that means? I made a covenant with my eyes.
well, I was thinking about that because there's a pattern here. He says, um, he'll say something he does or doesn't do, and then he connects it to something, some way of God. Um, so let me find one that's really obvious because that first one was confusing me a little bit. So like this one seems pretty obvious. So verse 9 through 12. If my heart has been enticed towards a woman and I have laid in wait at my neighbor's door, then let my wife grind for another and let others bow down on her. That would be heinous crime.
Heinous.
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 I can't read. It would be a heinous crime. It would be an iniquity to be punished by the judges, for that would be a fire that consumes as far as Abaddon. It would burn to the root of all my increase. So there's sort of this thing where he names something he hasn't done. Then he outlines some kind of consequence or punishment that should happen for that. And then there's even like a little bit of a what is it, a spiritual dimension, like for this one's verse 12, that would be a fire that consumes as far as a bad, and they would burn to the root of all my increase. So he says, if I committed adultery, that should be punished by the judges. It would be a crime. And also it would be a fire that burns in this sort of spiritual way as well.
So so when he says I made a covenant with my eyes, then is he deciding not to fall prey to that superficial, the passions, let's say, lust and all that stuff? It seems like that to me.
Yeah, so the first one might be lust. The one we just read is clearly adultery.
Yeah.
So this first one might be lust, where he says, I made a covenant with my eyes. How then could I gaze at a virgin? What would be my portion from God above and my heritage from the Almighty on high? Is not calamity for the unrighteous and disaster for the workers of iniquity? Does he not see my ways and number all my steps?
I just want to say something about that verse 3,
Mm-hmm.
because that's a throwback to this wisdom tradition, right?
Yep, the retribution.
Yeah.
It's almost like saying like, because when you lust after something, like you're wanting something that isn't yours or that you want to take and possess it. Um,
Such
and
the eyes again. That's
it,
so interesting.
right. Oh, that is interesting.
Because we all know how the book ends, right? The famous last line, or I don't know if it's the exact last line, but you know, um, yeah,
I've
I
seen
won't.
you.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but how? How? With the eyes? Like this gets back to that whole Blake thing. I got to find that quote actually, so I can say it properly.
Well, and also like Eve saw the fruit and saw that it was good to eat
Yeah, yeah,
and for
yeah,
wisdom. Like that's that taking and possessing thing. So like he's saying, um, how could I gaze at a virgin? So it's not just a about sexual ethics. This is talking about a whole mode of being where he's
yeah.
not looking at things in the world so that he can possess it. Because then
Right.
he talks about what would be my portion from God above and my heritage from the Almighty on high.
Yeah, he's thinking about deeper consequences and a deeper form of satisfaction, right?
Yeah.
Like he might he might enjoy the virgin for a fleeting moment, but then what about the deeper, more meaningful,
Mm-hmm.
rest of his life, right?
Yeah. And that would be different than what happens in verse 9, which would be someone else's wife. A virgin isn't someone else's wife.
Right.
A virgin is someone that could be taken, I guess, especially by someone in a position of power like that in those days.
Yeah. Still wouldn't be right though, but
Well, that's what I'm saying. That's what he's saying. Like,
yeah.
but that's
But he says
there's
about his wife, let me just check it here. He says, if my step has turned out of the way, and my heart walked after my eyes,
mm-hmm,
and if any blot has cleaved to my hands, then let me sow and let another eat. And then he goes into, then let my wife, right? So it's like what he's saying is then if I have been that kind of person, then whatever happens to me after that, I deserve, right?
yep,
Including like some other my wife having an adulterous relationship with another man kind of
yep.
thing.
Yeah, he's saying like if I do that towards others,
Yeah,
then let others do that towards me, and not only that, let God judge this as well.
right.
And so he's doubling down by saying like if I've done all this, I deserve whatever the
Whatever happens.
consequences are.
Yeah. And it's a pretty harsh thing to think about your wife committing adultery on you, right? Like,
Yeah. Okay, so verse 5, if I've walked in falsehood and my foot has hastened to deceit. This would be like lying
yeah,
and trying to manipulate. Um, Let me be weighed in a just balance and let God know my integrity. If my step has turned aside from the way and my heart has gone after my eyes, okay, there's the look again.
I know.
And if any spot has stuck to my hands, let another, yeah. Okay, so he's made a covenant with his eyes that
Hmm.
he's not going to
He's not
look
going to
out things.
follow his eyes. He's not following his eye like that Blake version of just
Mm-hmm,
the anatomical thing that sees, right? And then
mm-hmm.
and the brain gets the message to have. And he's going to see the world differently. That's why I want to find that Blake quote to get it right. Maybe by the next one. Um, because Blake talks about this, the actual, well, it's iconic vision is what it is. It's what it is.
Right.
That's how Blake, he doesn't use that term, but that's what he's talking about. using the eyes for iconic vision. And this is what Job, I think, has decided to do, in a sense that he's going to see the world iconically, right, as images of God.
Mm-hmm.
And then he can't defile those things if that's how he sees the world, I think.
Mm-hmm. My heart going after my eyes. Okay, so then if my heart has been enticed towards a woman, I have lain in wait at my neighbor's door. Then let my wife grind for another. It would be a heinous crime. Okay, so then 13, if I have rejected the cause of my manservant or maidservant when they brought a complaint against me, what then shall I do when God rises up? When he makes iniquity, what shall I answer him?
Here it says, what shall I do then when God rises up? And when he visits, what shall I answer him? So like he's fully expecting God to just like show up unannounced into his life. And if he's following his eyes, right, as he says previously,
Mm-hmm.
he's living that kind of life instead of seeing the world iconically, then God shows up for a visit. What's he going to say to him, right? How's he going to answer him for what he's doing? Because he's suddenly he isn't seeing the world as God's. Remember how Job saw everything as a gift
Mm-hmm.
in the beginning? Everything comes from God.
Mm-hmm.
And so, and I think that's where the care comes from in Job, in the first 29, chapter 29. The reason that he extends himself out so empathically towards people is because he sees that he sees everything as a gift from God.
Mm-hmm.
So if he just starts following his eyes around and doing whatever he wants, he's defiling the gift that God has given him, right?
Right.
He's being ungrateful. So then what's he going to do when God shows up and comes for a visit? Not to say that God ever did that before in his life, but he obviously believed that it could happen.
Yeah.
Right?
In the Hebrew it says, well, they're translating it here. What will I do when God rises to judge? How will I answer when called to account?
Oh, okay. Yeah.
So this reminds me of the parable of the ungrateful servant, where
Exactly.
he owes the big debt.
Yeah.
He goes to the the master's like, or arranging his accounts, calls this guy in and says, you need to pay your debt now. I'm collecting on all the debts. The guy throws himself down, begs to be forgiven. The master has pity on him and then forgives him the giant debt. And then he goes out, finds the guy that owes him $20, and then has him thrown in jail until it finishes it. And then when the master hears about that, he takes that guy. He's like, I forgave you this huge debt, and then you threw that guy into prison. And so I think that's what he's saying, because he's like, if I rejected my manservant or maidservant when they complained against me, what would I do when God rises up to judge and calls to account? If I've rejected them, God's going to reject me. Right, but he's actually, and then he's saying, like, I never rejected my manservant or maidservant.
And Jesus talks about this when he says, did you feed me when I was hungry? Did you visit me in prison? I never knew you.
Mm-hmm. Right. It also gets to sort of a day of, he believes God is going to make things right at some point. Like God, the idea of God rising to judge. So he says, when God arises, God's going to rise up to judge. And even God talks about this in his speech. There's going to be a time when God rises to judge, and he's going to call things to account. And Job's like, if I've done these things wrong, what will I say at that time?
Exactly. Yeah.
And then he says,
Especially because I don't think he could do any of that stuff out of ignorance. You know,
do what?
well, like follow his eyes, like he talks about, right?
Hmm.
Because he's Job.
Yeah.
So he would actually have to make the choice to do that. Like there are, I'm sure there are people that they do that, but they're not enlightened.
Conscious.
They're not enlightened beforehand. They get enlightened later, after
Yeah.
making all those, like Solomon, let's say, in Ecclesiastes, where you do all this stuff and then all of a sudden you say, oh, this is all just vanity.
Vanity.
But Job
Yeah.
already knows that. Like, I don't, yeah. Anyway.
And then, well, he says, did not he who made me in the womb make him? And did not one fashion us in the womb? Like he's saying, like, this is Job's view of humanity. He's like, everyone is made
Yeah, it's sacred.
equally in the womb.
Yeah, it's sacred. Like
Yep.
God made, right? Like this is what I mean. Like he sees everything as a gift.
Yep.
He really, really does.
Yep. He's given them a life. He's given me a life. What would I do if
Yeah.
um I acted unjustly against them?
Yeah.
Okay. Verse 16. If I have withheld anything that the poor desired, or have caused the eyes of the widow to fail, or have eaten my morsel alone as the fatherless have not eaten it. For from my youth the fatherless grew up with me, as with a father, and from my mother's womb I guided the widow.
Mhm.
That's such an interesting line. From my youth the fatherless grew up with me, as with a father. And then from my mother's womb I guided the widow. I'm gonna look at a different. It's the
Sounds like he was brought up with orphans, meaning his parents were just like him, caring, right?
Yeah, but it's this weird play on when I was young, I was a father to the fatherless.
Right, right.
So when I was a child, I was a father. And when I was in my mother's womb, I guided the widow.
Yeah. Interesting.
It is interesting. It's though from my youth I reared him as would a father, and from my mother's womb I guided, I transported. What a like a very it's almost one of those koans,
Yeah.
the contrasting imagery. If I had seen anyone perish for lack of clothing, or the needy without covering, if his body had not blessed me, and if he was not warmed with the fleece of my sheep, which he had a lot of sheep, if I have raised my hand against the fatherless. Okay, so he's kind of summarizing what he just said.
Yeah.
And now he's even just saying, like, if there was need and I didn't attend to it, if
Yeah.
someone needed something, if someone was lacking in a way and I didn't do what I could to um, aid them, if I saw someone suffering for lack of clothing, um, or if I raised up my hand, so he's just making this final, or this kind of, he's like, if I wasn't doing good, if I wasn't doing justice, then let my shoulder blade fall from my shoulder and let my arm be broken from its socket.
Mhm.
So he's like, and that would be incapacitating. I guess it'd be like,
Well, he says right below there in 23, for
mhm.
destruction from God was a terror to me, and by reason of his highness I could not endure. So his everything that he was motivated to do, he was motivated by the, in German they would say Hintergedanke, which means the behind thought or the thought in the back of your mind,
Yeah,
of that 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 he he had iconic vision. Like, his world was not devoid of God. God was everywhere in his world. And he wasn't watching him. He wasn't watching him to make sure that he did all the good things. I think Job knew that, how do I want to put this? There, like, before this, he said his righteousness, he wasn't striving for the robe and the diadem, right? He wasn't looking for the status. He wasn't operating out of fear of punishment so much as he knew that everything was sacred. He knew that everything was a gift, and he couldn't treat it any other way, right? Because he would end up what? Well, I don't think there's just not an option, actually. I just don't think Job had an option. He just couldn't, because he knew that it all came from God and that God was everywhere present, filling all things. He basically had that figured out, right? So this was not, I guess what I'm saying is, this is not a having mode for Job. He's not trying to get something out of the deal. This is a being mode for him. He is this way because he sees God in the world. He does. Yeah.
Okay, there's this interesting thing. Okay, so for calamity from God terrifies me. The word there, calamity, that's just calamity, destruction. From God terrifies me, alarms me. His splendor I cannot overpower. Okay, the majesty, the splendor. So
His Highness.
It's also dignity, majesty, splendor. It's the thing I have in my mind is when you puff up your chest, you fill up, right?
Yeah.
There's a swelling. The splendor of God. The word used there for splendor is an elevation, so this going up, an exaltation in rank. It also can mean a leprous scab, or like a swelling of the skin.
A swelling.
So this is a play on his skin disease.
Wow.
I could not face his majesty. I could not face his swelling. I could not face the, I don't know.
And
I just thought I'd point that out.
By reason of His Highness, I could not endure. Do you think that he's actually, like, seamlessly just attributing all of this swelling on his skin to God too? That this is actually interchangeable?
Well, it's one of those things where it has like that double meaning.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Like,
yeah,
the scabs on his skin are also the splendor of God.
Because the word there for splendor or majesty is the word for swelling in Leviticus. It's in Leviticus like 7-8 times when they're talking about how to, when there's a white swelling of the skin, if there of his body is swelling, in the raw flesh is swelling, and then telling how to treat these different wounds.
Yeah.
I just thought that was interesting.
That is interesting. So he sees his affliction. I mean, we know this as coming from God, but there's also something interesting about it, because it's the splendor of God, or at least it's being commingled with the idea of the splendor of God.
Well, he at least in this phrase, and I think this happens other places, probably we can't see it in the English, where he's smashing opposites together.
Yeah.
And this is part of that's that tension
Mm-hmm.
that you talk about. It's the constant turmoil that Job has. It's why do the righteous suffer? Those two things, righteousness and suffering together.
Yeah.
Or wickedness and prosperity together. Like Job is allowing those things to be what they are without trying to. He wants an answer from God for all this.
Yeah. Yeah.
Why is your majesty the swelling in my skin?
Right. Yeah, exactly. Beautiful. Perfect.
All right. Verse 24. If I have made gold my trust, or called fine gold my confidence, if I have rejoiced because of my wealth was abundant, or because my hand had found much, or if I looked at the sun when it shone, or the moon moving in splendor, and my heart had been secretly enticed, and my mouth had kissed my hand, this would also be an iniquity to be punished by the judges, for I would have been false to God above.
Mm-hmm.
Job hasn't really said a ton about his wealth, but here he makes it really clear, like, if I trusted in that, if that was the reason
That's
why.
all there was. Like it's very narcissistic, right? Like kiss my own hand.
Right. Like, look what I did.
Exactly. Yeah. And it really reflects just that horizontal plane that Tomberg talks about too, right? Where you lose the vertical.
Mm-hmm.
And Job always has the vertical. That's why he sees everything as a gift. But here he's talking about, if I was just living on this horizontal plane, right, where it was just me and all my stuff. Yeah, then I should be punished because I deny the God that is above.
Yeah, and he's even saying, just if my heart had been secretly enticed, like, even if it wasn't obvious, even if it was just in my heart, that would be an iniquity that could be punished by the judges, for I would have been false. So you've been like, everything that I've just said would have been false, and untrue. It would have been vanity. It would have been a show for this hidden reason.
Well, in verse 28, it actually says, I would have denied the God that is above.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So that gets back to what I just said about the horizontal plane. It would have been a life with no vertical aspect to it, right? It's godless. It's godlessness is what he's describing.
Mm-hmm.
There is nothing from above, right? It just comes to me. I acquire it. It's mine. I take it,
If I have verse 29, if I have rejoiced in the ruin of him who hated me, or exulted when evil overtook him. So now he's moving on to his enemies. He's saying, like, even if I rejoiced in the ruin of him who hated me, if evil overtook him, I have not let my mouth sin by asking for his life with a curse. So he's saying, like, I haven't asked for the life of my enemies. If the men of my tent would have not said, quote, who is there that has not been filled with his meat? The sojourner has not lodged in the street. I have opened my doors to the traveler. So then he's talking about the stranger, and hospitality, that he's never let anyone go hungry, that travelers didn't have to stay in the street, that they could stay in Job's home, or his homes,
his city,
right. Okay, so he doesn't ask for punishment of his enemies. He's hospitable, which hospitality was a huge thing back then. If I have concealed my transgressions as others do by hiding iniquity in my heart. I think this is like a little bit of a jab towards his friends.
This is
because he made the accusation that that's what they're doing. They're concealing something and hiding something in their heart.
Yeah, well, that's what I remember we talked about. This is a while back, but I said something like, I think that Job is saying things that his friends think, but they don't want to say them out loud either, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because they think you're going to get struck down by God.
Mm-hmm.
But in the King James in 33, it says, if I covered my transgressions as Adam by hiding my
Oh,
iniquity in my bosom.
yeah.
So that's covering the nakedness, right?
It's literally Adam. But Adam means
Humanity,
in humanity.
right? And it also covering transgressions as Adam is the covering with the fig leaf,
Mm-hmm.
right? And hiding. And so that's interesting to me because I have to ask myself here, like, what does the nakedness mean? What is it? What are you laughing about?
I don't know. This is just like I saw this, but I don't know. Keep going. I'm
Okay.
laughing because I'm enjoying it.
Okay. Well, it's like the nakedness that Adam covers is seems to me to be almost the vulnerability that Job lives out in his authenticity, right? His integrity. Like he's being pierced, right? By
Mm-hmm.
God. And um and that was kind of the thing that ends up happening to Adam. He gets cast out of the garden and he gets pierced by the thorns. The thorns have to teach him who he really is, right? That he is vulnerable. But Job already has that. So that's interesting. Like suddenly, for me anyway, just reading that, the nakedness that Adam covers seems to be his vulnerability, which when exposed, and this is actually the name of that podcast you're listening to, Soft White Underbelly. It's the same idea.
Yep.
It's vulnerability. That's what a soft white underbelly implies, right?
Yeah.
It's vulnerability that is required in order to be authentic in the world.
Yeah. So
And yeah.
let me just try to. So he's not saying like he hasn't transgressed like Adam. He's saying I don't hide.
Yeah.
I didn't hide like Adam did.
It's not covering his vulnerability.
And I don't hide it in my heart.
Yeah.
And then he says, this is really interesting, because I stood in great fear of the multitude and the contempt of families terrified me. So that's it. It reminds, like, I'm reading through First Samuel with some guys, and King Saul is terrified of the people. He's always just totally screwing up because he's afraid of
The mob.
of the mob, what people think, and he's making decisions based on, like, they're going to war, and he makes this vow. He says, "No one will eat until we, we vanquish our enemies or whatever."
Yeah.
And so they spend all this time like marching. Everyone's really tired. His son, who didn't know that he had made this vow, because Jonathan just seems to ignore his dad, eats some honey, and then word gets out that someone had eaten during the day. And so he's like, whoever it is needs to be put to death. And they're like, well, it's your son. And he's like, all right, I guess that's what we're gonna do. And then everyone who actually loves Jonathan, they're like, don't be rash, don't be rash. It's
Yeah.
okay. And he totally backs off of his vow. And you can see how he made the vow because of his fear and kind of trying to be this
Yeah.
leader and impress
He's a poser.
yeah. And then when Jonathan did this and it's brought to his attention, and they're like, no, 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 don't. He just totally backs off. And he's like, okay, okay.
Yeah.
And there's a countless example. It's like Saul's thing.
Yeah.
And that's what this reminds me of. because he's saying, I didn't hide it in my heart because of the fear of the multitudes. So like Saul was always hiding, even like even when he was pronounced king, he was hiding in the luggage. Just Samuel makes this announcement. Like, I forget what they did. It was like, anyway, they got down to his family and he's like, Saul will be king. They're like, where is he? And he was like hiding in the luggage because he's afraid of everyone.
Wow.
Anyway, so Job is not okay. Hiding iniquity in my heart because I stood in great fear of the multitude, and the contempt of families terrified me, so that I kept silence and did not go out of doors.
Yeah.
So he's sort of saying that I've never hidden anything.
Yeah.
Everything is in the open, even my mistakes.
Yeah.
Okay, then we get to the good part. I love this. So then he says, "Oh, that I had one to hear me." So this is like his last like call out.
Yeah.
And then he says, "Here is my signature. Let the Almighty answer me. Oh, that I had the indictment written by my adversary." So he's saying, he's signed. This is we kind of have this courtroom thing going on about justice and
Yeah.
Doctrine of retribution. Like, how is this just that the righteous suffer? Job is building this case. He's presented it. He's claiming he's innocent. And then this sort of, here is my signature. He's officially signing the paperwork. This would be like the document that's going to be taken to the other party.
Yeah. With his
like
complaints.
with the complaints. So if you had a complaint against someone, you would write up a document, you would bring it to them, they would read it, and then you'd try to work things out. So he's officially signing the document now. Yeah. And then he said, "Oh, that I had the indictment written by my adversary." So the indictment is what crime you're guilty of.
Yeah.
So like Job doesn't say here, again, like he said before, I'm innocent. I'll be proven innocent. He says, if only I had an indictment. maybe if I sign this, I officially send this to God, that I will get an indictment. And then he says of the indictment, if I could have knowledge of what I'm guilty of, I would carry it on my shoulder. I would bind it to me as a crown. I would give him an account of all my steps. Like a prince, I would approach him. Well, this binded, like if I knew what I was guilty of, I would wear it around proudly, because that would be the answer. That would be the reason.
Yeah. Yeah.
And Job knows that it would resolve this whole thing.
And it would also be right. It would also be righteous. Like, see, he's a righteous man. Mm-hmm. He's a man who cares. And so he's not afraid, but he wants to know what he did wrong, because what he did wrong wronged somebody else. Like Job sees himself as being completely connected to the rest of the world, and not right. And that it's a gift from God. And that, if he were to think that his wealth was his own, or if he were to look upon another woman and just take her for his own, that would be ungrateful to God. Mm-hmm. That move would be actually a move against God. Yep. Because everything is sacred, right? Mm-hmm. And so if I can figure out what I did wrong, then I will proudly wear that, because I don't want to afflict others, because it's so sacred to him. It's true. It is. It's that sacred to him that it would break his heart if there was something that he had done that had shown any kind of ungratefulness to God. Mm-hmm. I think. Yep. And so that's why I think he feels like, no, I am totally, I'll own it. Because it has to be made right for the other. Yep. Right? for the person who's also sacred, who's also the gift from God, right?
Yep.
There's just no way in his mind, there's no reason not to make things right.
That's right.
He's not petty at all.
No. He's fully ready to take whatever is revealed. He's ready.
That's also an example, like that what you just read, of courage and humility together.
Right.
That's exactly what that is. It's like, write the indictment and I'll wear it.
Yeah.
Okay, that's courageous. Who wants to know that, and who wants to wear it?
Yeah, and then he says, after that, I would give an account of my steps. So I would be conspicuous. I will tell you of my steps. Okay, but then he says, I will approach him like a prince, which is also the word for a commander, a religious, a captain, a ruler. There's like, even though he's saying like, if I have an indictment, he's also holding on to like his dignity. He's not giving that up either. It's not this false humility where he's embarrassing himself.
No. No, because he has the indictment. He's owning it.
Mm-hmm.
And he approaches God.
Right.
Like that is someone who knows that God loves him.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yep. And then he ends with this sort of final statement, which is like, it's kind of like, if anything I said here is wrong, then then it's sort of like that when you sign the paperwork and it says, I certify that the following statements are true, and if anything is false, I will be liable for whatever.
Yeah.
So that's what 38, 39, and 40 is, and it's echoes of the curse of Adam. So he says, if my land has cried out against me and its furrows have wept together, if I have eaten its yield without payment and made its owners breathe their last, let thorns grow instead of wheat and foul weeds instead of barley.
Mm-hmm.
So he's saying like, if my land cries out against me, if I've done any of this, then let thorns grow. He's willing to reap the consequences of whatever. He really is being courageous, and he's basically saying, I'm ready. Here's my case. I'm ready for an answer.
Yeah.
I want something, an indictment, a reason.
Yeah. Yeah, no, he's and that's his what's the name of that podcast? Soft White
Underbelly.
He's just rolling over there and exposing it all. Really. Yeah.
And then the words of Job are ended.
Yeah.
So next we're going to be introduced to Elihu. But we'll do that next time.
Yeah.
Thanks, Shari. This was really good.
Thanks, Jess.